In the ongoing debate over a Boston Olympics, the strongest agreement is over the need to measure public opinion. It wasn't always that way, but with surveys that show a drop in public support for the Games, a referendum is getting a thumbs up from the local organizing committee, Boston 2024. Tonight we get an Olympics perspective from one of the early supporters of a referendum, the founder of the United Independent Party, Evan Falchuk. Thank you very much for being with us, Evan.
Glad to be back.
Take us back to when you came out with this idea. This was January, around the time there was a burst of euphoria about having these games here, maybe.
Yeah, well, it came from what we'd been doing with the United Independent Party as we're out doing our organizing meetings around the state. People were really surprised about the fact that Boston had even submitted a bid, let alone the fact that we had been picked. And when they started to see the parade of elected officials and connected political consultants and lobbyists and others that were behind this and which had done most of this work behind closed doors, they became very concerned. So what we would hear all the time at our meetings was, yeah, we want to talk about education, or we want to talk about the T increasingly as we got into February with all the storms. But the number one issue everybody wanted to talk about was what's going on with the Olympics? How did this happen? And what can we do about it?
So how would a referendum address that exactly?
Well, we have to have a binding law, a binding vote. And Massachusetts has a mechanism for this through a process called an initiative petition, where you draft an actual law. What we put together is what we call an act for a privately funded Olympics. What it says is that you cannot use taxpayer money for the Olympics. If taxpayer money is going to be used for transit improvements, that's okay. But basically taking the word of 2024, which is that we don't want any taxpayer money. You get that on the ballot by having the Attorney General approve your language. In September, you can start to collect signatures. If you get enough of them, the language goes to the legislature, which could enact it as a law, and that would be during the spring of 2016. If they do not, then in May of 2016, you can go and get more signatures, and if you get enough, it gets onto the ballot in November of 2016. That's what we're working towards.
And get a little more precise about the time, because it sounds like this is either almost or exactly the same time as a presidential primary vote.
Well, there's two different things, and there has been some confusion about this. There's a concept of non-binding votes in Massachusetts. So, for example, City Councilor Josh Zakim wants to have a certain number of questions on the ballot in November of 2015. Those would be non-binding. And the mayor of Boston has said that he wouldn't follow whatever it was that came out with if it ever came to a vote. Bill Galvin, the Secretary of State, has said he thought there could be a statewide vote at the time of the presidential primary in March of 2016. That's something that would go through the legislature, would be a question, sort of an advisory question, again, non-binding vote. If you want to have a binding vote, the first state you could do that is November of 2016. So when we at the United Independent Party talk about this, or when you hear the organizers of Boston 2024 talking about this, they're talking about November of 2016.
Well, I've heard two things about the kind of questions. One is that you get a lot of clarity from yes or no, but then again, what does that mean? And then on the other hand, you say, yes, we like the games. Second question, we like it, but we don't want to have any taxes paid into it. So, I mean, is it possible to get a clear answer from any of this?
It is, because the way it works is that you're actually voting on a law. Those of us that voted in 2014 will remember there were 4 questions on the ballot then, and the basic question that was being asked to you was, do you think that this law should be enacted? So what we've drafted with the Act for a Privately Funded Olympics is language that says no taxpayer money shall be used to aid or further the Olympic effort, no taxpayer guarantees should be provided to support the Olympic effort, and if the legislature wants to spend money on the MBTA or other transit improvements, even though they'll also benefit the Olympics, we don't want to stop that from happening. That should be allowed to go forward. So that kind of question put in front of voters, where you say a yes vote means that you want to see the Olympics be privately paid for, that's pretty straightforward. The challenge that a lot of people have, and we see what Boston 2024 has said, is they say they want to have a referendum. They haven't said what they want their referendum to be. Just today, John Fish, chairman of Boston 2024, was giving a speech about where they were in that process. He talked about the city having to hire an independent consultant to go look at their books with the view towards giving voters confidence that the full faith and credit of the city, of the Commonwealth, and of taxpayers wouldn't be committed in a foolhardy way. Well, here he is saying very openly what most people already suspect, which is this is really about getting access to taxpayer money. So the referendum that we've proposed, the question we proposed, which is about no taxpayer money, a privately funded Olympics, is what's needed. We can make sure that this issue becomes much less controversial by clarifying the key issue that most voters care about.
Now, what I have not heard as much about before with other cities having the Olympics, and what I'm hearing more about now, is that in Boston there are forms of insurance to cover any potential losses for taxpayers.
They looked at this in Chicago, and they managed to get some coverage for a small portion of the cost of the Olympics. The challenge that the organizers of Boston 2024 have around getting insurance coverage is that the typical cost overrun for the Olympics is 252%. On a $9 billion project, that's a huge insurance policy. And given the likelihood of cost overruns, and not just overruns, but shortfalls in sponsorships, it's going to cost a lot of money to do it. It might cost so much that the premium is as much as the cost of the coverage. It's possible to find. You can always find someone to insure something. The big issue for me is if it's possible to do that, they ought to go do that. The taxpayer shouldn't be here as a backstop to bail out whatever it is that doesn't work. And again, this is what Boston 2024 has been selling from the beginning, is that there were going to be all these wonderful benefits and it wasn't going to cost taxpayers anything. What I see as an opportunity, which is that the more voters can be organized and alerted to the reality of what's going on in our democracy, the more they can be empowered to say, let's deal with the issues that really matter, the ones where you could say, think about all the energy that's been put into this Olympics effort, which could be directed towards making sure that the MBTA is properly fixed, that schools get the funding that they need, that every veteran has a place to sleep at night, that job training programs are funded, that seniors are able to get the services they need, that we build more housing. You can go down the list.
It's starting to sound like riders in a budget bill here, though, isn't it? Isn't that kind?
Well, these are the things at the end of the day that will have to compete against funding for the Olympics, and this is exactly the point. And I think voters, when they understand that we're talking about billions of dollars, not just in spending that might be required, but also in these guarantees where we'd have to issue debt or at least have the credit rating of the state impaired because of the exposure to this Olympic risk. What that means is all these other issues that we all care about, those are going to be competing against this. And if the Olympics are coming in 2024 and the velodrome in Somerville isn't complete, and it's because there's not enough money, the issue of whether or not your schools get properly funded is going to have to go head to head with this velodrome problem.
Now, has any other city, at least in this country, done this before with the Olympics?
Basically had it be a privately funded
No,
Olympics?
no. I mean, had this kind of referendum before going forward.
Absolutely. So in Colorado, back in the 1970s, they had a vote very much like what we're talking about here, which caused them to withdraw the bid because they really couldn't run the Olympics. They were trying to run there without the taxpayer backing. The difference with what they're saying in Boston is that they've been claiming they don't need taxpayer backing, so I would leave it to them and the IOC to figure out a way to do it. There have been other examples in Europe more recently where voters have said we're not interested in this because of the issue of the cost and many of the kinds of demands that the IOC makes on cities. So this is a time historically that the Olympic movement has had trouble with in terms of getting people to bid. The 2022 Winter Games, they only have 2 cities bidding for them. It's a larger challenge with the whole business model of the Olympics and these mega events that is presenting problems.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Anytime.
Evan Falchuk of the United Independent Party.